Hey guys, Mike from the WCA. Really happy with the 4 o'clock class this year, this term. Very impressed. I was pleased to see Andrew and Andrew, the two Andrews, play on Saturday in that match at the NSCF. I thought you guys handled it both very, very well. It looks like the games were hard fought, even though you know each other in class and that you're friends, and that's not always easy to do, right? I was impressed. As a player myself, I know it's not always easy to sit across from someone that you know and then have to compete. And then to top it off, come to a place on Sunday and share that experience in front of all the other players. So my hat off to you. Anyway, this was the Fischer game. So yeah, I messed up at first. I had the queen on c6, which definitely made a difference. She was there in another line earlier in the game or in the training position, and I forgot. So we had to switch it up. So here's what you started with. This is actually from the real game. I want to go through it again and take you through some variations that could have popped up and did even in your play. So here, I don't know about you, but I find it difficult sometimes to play this kind of position, which Neil McDonald calls a nuki. That's how he pronounces NQE. A nuki, according to him, is not quite an endgame, NQE. And the reason here he may call this not quite an endgame is because of what happened to a couple of us in class. There were two checkmates on Sunday from this position, both for black, and almost a third. Fred got a lot of play in his game as well, although it looked like Andrew was able to fight off the attack, Andrew Feldman. Here again, always be aware of the queen and knight on a board that's 5 by 5. Like approximately 5 by 5. The queen and knight inside there are deadly, and Aurelius found a gorgeous attack to win that game. So here, Fischer kind of likes the transition of getting into a pure endgame, and he plays b4. And if you don't take, we had some kids suggest and actually play the move knight d7 in class, which holds the pawn. The problem with knight d7, and this is really a master move or a computer move, it wasn't played in the game. So Fischer, we're not sure what Fischer would have done had this been played, but if you have a computer engine at home, this is the kind of position where you might let it run, but make sure you do some thinking for yourself first. So when I looked at this, my first reaction was, okay, what do computers do in these positions is they attack things. And sure enough, I put this on my computer and I started to analyze the move queen to d5, which just attacks the knight. It attacks the e-pawn. And as a human, I dismissed it at first and I thought, well, black can just play queen c7. And then I learned something from the computer. Again, I can't, as a human, calculate something to a win here. I know I'm up a pawn. I can create, my b pawn can run. I could play pawn to b5 at some point, but the computer finds the move bishop to c4 here. And doing this on ChessSpace, it turns out it's not just my computer. If I run this in the cloud, it turns out that some other chess players or coaches had looked at this. I actually had 16 different people had looked at this exact position before. So that comes from when coaches find these positions. We find them in games that are famous or instructive for teaching technique. That's what we're doing this semester. So other coaches around the world are doing the same thing that I'm doing. And so they want to analyze these games too, to have answers for their students, So it turns out 16 of us had looked at this exact position. After bishop c4, white is getting ready to come in. You can take the pawn here, but a cool move, you're going to get hit with a check first before recovering the pawn, misplacing the king, and then taking the pawn. And there's all sorts of trouble here on this line. You really can't allow bishop to e6 you don't want to lose a piece. So if you break the pin and activate the queen, it looks like you are getting out of trouble, but the pawn may just start to run, or the bishop can just clog you up. And you see the problem now is you can't take the pawn because your knight would hang. So just quickly, I don't want to spend too much time. The move knight d7 most likely would have gotten hit with a centralizing queen move, queen d5. Great technique, by the way, when you see masters just centralize their queens. Okay, so instead, Wolfgar Unziger takes the pawn. Heaven only knows what my accent actually means in German. I could have said a number of things there. And now Fischer has threat number one, the outside pass pawn. These are such pain in the necks, as evidenced here by not only the fact that it's on the outside of the board, but keep in mind, grandmasters, you have bishop against knight, which means if you create play on both sides of the board, the knight is going to get tripped up. It's very hard for the knight to get across town so quickly. Be aware, if you have the knight, of using a check. You don't have one here, but sometimes players will give a check and then take an extra move with the knight, Like if you can imagine my knight here on g4, if I needed to get where the queen is, if I could get this check in and then come here, it's like I'm stealing a move, and then I make it to the side of the board one move quicker. Okay, but here, obviously, Fischer is not going to let that happen. But black, however, does create a threat. You don't want the queen taking the pawn down there on f2. So Fred or somebody in the class, we looked at after Fischer's move, which was to block the attack and offer the trade, which Unziger accepted, but I think it's actually Unziger. Yeah, it's spelled that way, but I like Unziger better. I think I'm going to say Unziger. His first name is Wolfgar. That's pretty cool, too, so I'll just call him maybe Wolf for short. Yeah, I think I like that one the best. Wolf it is. Okay, so Wolf over here decides to trade off and go into the ending we discussed in class. And I believe Fred and a couple of others were like, well, I don't want to make that trade. Well, you have to be careful here because there is the threat always of this bishop hitting the knight, and if you remove the knight, you pick off the e-pawn. So, for example, if you play queen d8 after bishop e2, this is not so easy for black. Supporting the knight just runs into bishop taking, pawn taking. We take on e5 check, and there are so many ways to lose this game. I don't want to go into it too much here, but just king f7 loses instantly to queen d5 check. The queens are coming off the board. If they come off this way, we have the position that we worked on already that you guys should have cold in your mind. You have two split pawns. You guys see that? The two split pawn defense. You just push the one that's not being attacked, and the black king can't take. So after queen d8, it's pretty clear that bishop e2 is going to give white a really nice advantage. So Wolf decides to go for the trade. My sister says I have the mentality of a fourth grader. I think that's more than I deserve. Now the same problem. It's not quite the outside pawn it was a moment ago, being a b pawn, yet you see that the knight is still going to have to do some traveling to keep an eye on the pawn. So black says, well, my king can get inside the box, and this is one of the most instructive parts of the game. In the endgame, in a position like this where you have one asset, you have this pawn, the idea is to create or stir up play somewhere else. And Fischer does that beautifully with the move f4. Running these kinds of moves on computers sometimes run the risk of the computer saying, well, it may not be the perfect move. It may have a tactical solution or some computer idea, but Fischer as a human, and meanwhile the computer, I'll just double check this. Yeah, F4 is the computer's choice anyway, but be careful. You don't want to rely on this thing too much. So king e7 was played in the game, and if you take, the pawn will take knight f6, and it's similar to what happened in the game, and you're going to get this nice compact structure guarding all of these central squares. Now black is the one that has the outside pawn on this side, but as usual, the cluster of pawns will keep these two pieces away, and at any time this bishop can swing over here and stop the h-pawn for advancing. So not taking right away after king e7 didn't change much. Fischer starts to centralize the king. Okay, now we have, I'm sorry, let's go back. He starts to centralize the king, and now we have knight f6. Okay, after knight f6, we're getting, again, the kind of situation, my friends, where Fischer is sort of waiting, but also saying to himself, what is my opponent's next move? He put his knight on f6. He's not coming forward, so what square is he controlling? And then just very calmly, bishop b5 just takes away the option of trading knights and bishops. You cannot go into a king and pawn ending here. As evidenced in this line, if you play knight here, we just take, and take, and that should look familiar to you guys. Look at that, the split pawn defense. The king attacks one of your pawns. Now this time it's just in reverse. Pawn e6, it's over. Those pawns can't be touched. The two here on the king side are just going to be gobbled up by white. So this is just over. So, when he plays bishop to b5, it just takes one square away from the knight. The knight is almost zugzwanged already here. It doesn't really have much to do. So the king swings over, and now a check. So what he's doing is just kind of toddling or coggling back and forth. I don't think either one of those are words. Toddling and coggling. I don't think they're words, but they sounded right? I coggled and toggled here. Yeah, I like it. King e7, and nice move by Fischer. Pawn c6. And after c6, black has the unfortunate dilemma of what to do about that pawn as it runs. King d6 is not playable. Stop the video, because here we kind of went a little quick at the end of class, which happens sometimes. So here you can spend more time. You just take on e5, and that's really cool. The king cannot take because the pawn just runs and the knight is very badly placed. So back here, after c6, the wolf decides to play knight e8 to cover the c7 square, and now Fischer voluntarily breaks up his own pawns. He wins a pawn by doing that, but he shatters the rest of them. They're all isolated or double isolated, but as always, when pawns in the center are isolated or double isolated, when they're controlling squares like that, I mean, look at his structure. Every one of those squares are under Fischer's control. Not pretty for the knight. He cut the chessboard right in half, which you will see a lot at this level. Okay, so he starts his play on the king side, and this is one of the moments we talked about in class. There's the blockading move with the knight, and king d4. And as soon as he plays king d4, Wolf decides to break on the king side, and the computers all love the move king c5 here. Just charging into that part of the board, playing king b6 next. Like I can give you a sample line, like g5, king b6, just going after the knight, protecting the knight, and then bishop e2 attacking one of the pawns. And once that happens, you may get these trades, and then just bishop to g4, and black is in complete zugzwang here. No need to go any further, okay? But Fischer, as a human, after king d4, h5, decides to come back to the king side. And his thinking, I am assuming, is, well, what can black do? He cannot offer me a knight trade again, for the same reason we discussed before. So his thinking is, I can stop this play with my king. while you sit on this side of the board. You guys can play the same way, but you just have to make sure you have it all under control. So he continues to push, and now the same cool move, bishop e2, kind of provoking the pawns to move. Here is a perfect example, gentlemen, that, can I say gentlemen? That's right. Yes, Rusa is not here, and yeah, there are no girls this term. So after g5, you get a real good example of the power of this bishop on both sides of the board. It's no wonder this is in an endgame book. Bishop e2, h4, and then a simple swap. The bishop returns to c4 to stop the knight from coming over. Knight has to go somewhere. And again, on knight e6, just take it. If the king takes, there are the split pawns already in action. The game's finish it, I tell you. So, after knight e8, how to win. You play king f4, and you just pick off the pawn. King d8, king g4, king c7, and the really cool move, bishop f7. He just tells the black king, you know, you take the pawn, I take the knight. So the knight moves. Fischer sacks his c-pawn by taking the h-pawn because he can get to this position. And after this position, I'll set those highlights. Those are the only places the knight can move. The next move is king here, and the wolf resigns. I sent a link in the blog to a Fritz trainer online that has an endgame database. Take a look at it. You can, I think it's 5 pieces or less. So you can put this actual position on, and the machine will tell you exactly how to win it. I think they've mastered 5-piece endings or less. So check it out. It's a cool site. You guys are the best.